Hey everybody, and welcome back. My name is Mel, and today we're going to be talking about some of my science fiction recommendations. This was sparked because I am the captain of Ilma, which is the sci-fi team for REALMATHON, but you can watch this video after REALMATHON is over if you're just looking for some good sci-fi recs. If you have no clue what I'm talking about in regards to REALMATHON, it is a readathon hosted by Covers with Cassidy that runs through the entire month of April, and it is a competitive, team-based readathon. This year it is all about increasing your magic in order to keep your rift from closing and your world from being destroyed forever. So myself and Jade from JD Ray Reads are hosting the sci-fi team. If you haven't joined a team already, you should definitely join Ilma because we're gonna crush it this year. We're gonna do great. So a lot of people were looking for some science fiction recommendations, and I figured that readathon or no readathon, it was a great time to give some sci-fi recs. So I am going to tailor this just a little bit to REALMATHON, but again, all of these recommendations will still apply without it. We'll go over just some general sci-fi recs, some hybrid recommendations, so science fiction mixed with another genre such as mystery, thriller, horror, or fantasy, and then also some short science fiction recommendations that will be great for peace talks, or if you're just looking to get into the genre and you don't want a huge time commitment. So first up is one that will surprise no one, and honestly, I really want to recommend the second book in the series. Unfortunately, I can't recommend the second book without recommending the first one, and that is the Expanse series. Leviathan Wakes is where you start, but my personal favorite is Caliban's War, which is the second book in the series. This is an epic sci-fi series that starts off with James Holden, who logs a distress call. Turns out that there was more to this ship in the distress call than they thought, and he sends off a transmission that basically starts a war between Mars, Earth, and the Belt. This series, the first book does have some like sci-fi like zombie things, which are really cool, but that's not necessarily an overarching plot of the whole series. I just found this to be a lot of fun. Each novel does take a little bit of time to get invested though, or at least it did for me. The first half was a little bit on the slower side, and then a lot of the like epic sci-fi-ness that you expect comes in the second half. This is a very character-driven series, so if you're somebody that loves and gets really attached to characters, then this could be a really good choice for you. Highly recommend. Then for just another generalized recommendation is Sleeping Giants. This is a sci-fi set a little bit differently than Leviathan Wakes. It is more set on Earth and is not like this epic sci-fi space opera. And it's about a girl named Rose who's riding her bike in South Dakota when she stumbles upon a giant mechanical robot hand. And then we flip forward 17 years later where all of these bizarre artifacts are starting to show up in different places, and Rose is now a highly trained physicist. And what they're trying to figure out is what is up with all of these mechanical parts, and they're on the verge of this complex mystery of the century. This is told in a series of like interviews and letters, so it was an excellent audiobook experience. That is definitely the format that I would recommend you guys consuming this one, because it does a really good job of distinguishing between the different people talking and really brings to life that interview format. This is a trilogy, I believe. It is completed. Highly recommend. And then moving into some hybrids, and we're going to start off with an author that you will see a couple of times in this video. Normally I wouldn't repeat authors several different times, but I do feel like each of these books appeals to a different reader and for a different reason. So the first one that I wanted to mention is Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. Mira Grant is Shauna Maguire's pen name that she writes most of her science fiction and horror under. This is a sci-fi horror, but I definitely would say that it leans more sci-fi. It's following a group that sets out to discover what happened to this ship that was doing a mockumentary in the Mariana Trench and ended up missing. They sent back footage from this where something horrific happened, and they think there might have been creatures involved, but nobody is really able to tell whether the video was a spoof or whether it was actual footage. So they set out with this crew of mercenaries and biologists and herbologists. All of these different specialists go out on the ship together to figure out what happened. It is quite slow. The horror elements of it don't happen until the latter half of the book. The beginning is a lot of setup and science talk. This is one that when I originally read it, it was not one of an all-time favorite for me. It was one I really enjoyed, but the pacing did get to me a little bit. However, the longer I get away from this book and the more that I think about it, I just cannot believe that there are not killer mermaids in the Mariana Trench. Like, she makes this so realistic to me that every time I look at the ocean, I wonder, you know, what is out there? What are we missing? What have we not found yet? So I think she did a really good job with the setup to this book leading into the suspense. It just took me a little while to fully appreciate it. This is a hybrid so it'll get you points for hybrid. It's also on the list of my favorites, so you can definitely use it for that prompt as well. Highly recommend. However, on the flip side of that, I did want to mention to you guys the novella that she wrote, Rolling in the Deep, which is the prequel novella to Into the Drowning Deep. It is quite short. It would be great for a Peace Talks weekend, and it follows the crew that went out on the mockumentary before the Into the Drowning Deep crew went behind them. I don't think you necessarily need to read them in any particular order. If you want to be more surprised by the horror elements, read Into the Drowning Deep first, but if you're like, not sure if this is going to be my kind of thing, I want to dip my toe in, you could definitely do Rolling in the Deep first. It really doesn't matter. And then on the flip side of that, I also wanted to recommend Feed by Mira Grant. This is a little bit of a different type of story. It reads slightly younger than Into the Drowning Deep, and it's not YA, but it is a little bit more accessible on the science front of things, and is following journalists. So a brother and a sister and their crew who are vloggers, and they're vying to become part of the media for the new presidential campaign. But the flip side of this is a world where zombies happened when we found the cure to the common cold and the cure to cancer, and they accidentally intermingled and made zombies. This is much more following the press side of things than it is the science zombie side of things. So if Into the Drowning Deep is a little bit too much science for you, but you still kind of like the writing style and the vibes, this one might work a lot better. It is a slow story. For the majority of the book, I said I am bored yet intrigued, and that remained still, but this was a 4-star read. I definitely recommend it if you're looking for a little zombie with a slightly different take. Then let's flip into a fantasy sci-fi hybrid that you guys have heard me talk about a million times by now, but I'm not gonna shut up. So are you ready? It's Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. This, like I said, is a fantasy science fiction hybrid following two siblings, one who was taken by the Order when she was quite young to try to cure her from an illness, and now she has these magical powers that she can wield a blade, open portals, and is one of the strongest in the realm. And then we have her brother, who is traumatized by her being taken away from her family and is part of the rebellion that feels like the Order should not have this much power. It does have slight sci-fi elements in a lot of the technology and things that they use. It is magic, but it reminds me a lot of the lightsabers and ships and things like that that are used in Star Wars. Rachel calls it gay fantasy Star Wars, and I think that that is an inept description, but not, if you don't like Star Wars, then I would still pick up this book. Like, the Star Wars is not heavy influenced, but it is there. If you enjoy Star Wars, I think you will see the influences here, but you don't have to love Star Wars to read this. It is much more of its own fantasy thing. I loved it. I think this appeals to a lot of different people. I think it can appeal to YA readers wanting to read up a little bit. It's got lots of world building for adult readers. There's even a dash of sapphic romance in here for those of you that may be primarily romance readers and wanting to dip your toe into a different kind of vibe. So would definitely recommend this for lots and lots of people. I had a great time with it. The series, it is a trilogy, and the trilogy is complete, so even better. While we're on the fantasy sci-fi kick, I might as well go ahead and mention Blood Trials by N.E. Davenport. This one just came out this past year, and I believe the sequel is either out or will be out very, very soon. I did not expect to enjoy this as much as I did, but I had a really, really good time with it. Again, this is one of those that leans kind of on the new adult front. If you're used to reading young adult books but want to kind of dip your toes more into the adult sphere, then this might really work for you. It's following Ikenna, who wants to be part of basically the Marines in this world. She's trying to infiltrate them in order to figure out what happened to her grandfather. He died, and she doesn't believe it was an accident. She believes that it was murder, so she's going to try to infiltrate these Marines to figure out what happened. There are some politics side of things, but this is also very Hunger Games-esque, especially for the beginning of the story, and then once you hit about halfway is when the politics and the maneuvering really start to settle in. There are trials, and while it is set kind of on a planet outside of Earth and is very much so sci-fi in that way, there are some blood magic type of things that come into play, making this a really good fantasy sci-fi blend. This is a super breakneck speed type story, so if you're somebody that likes a slower, more character-driven, slow developing plot type of book, don't pick this one up. But if you're looking for more of a breakneck kind of speed, you like trials, you like a little bit of gore, science, and fantasy, I think this would be a great book for you. Then we have one that I just recently read this year that is a science fiction mixed with a horror, and that is Dead Silence by S.A. Barnes. If you've read From Below from Darcy Coates, I feel like this is a very similar concept, only set in space. It's following Claire, who does not want to be on Earth. She wants to have her own ship, and she wants to always be in space, and she's She's been told that this is going to be her last mission before the ship that she's been captain of is going to be basically grounded. But while they're out there on their last mission, they see a ship that was a luxury, like basically cruise ship in space that is completely abandoned and they thought had gone missing with everyone dying many, many years ago. So they decide to investigate it in order to bring loot home and get some riches, but things do not go as planned. And then you flip back into the present timeline where she is being interrogated after her entire crew ended up dead. It was a really good time. I think that it would have been a little bit better if we had had one timeline or the other and not meshed the two together and just kind of focused on the one. But overall, I really enjoyed this. It's super fast paced. The audio was a good time. I would definitely recommend it. And I can't go this entire video without talking about Red Rising by Pierce Brown. I do own a copy of this, but I don't know where it went. So I'm just gonna have to show you guys a picture of it. But Red Rising is following Darrow, who is a red and is working down in the mines. This is a very caste society where different colors mean that you are able to do and be a part of different parts of the world. It's a science fiction type world, so they're mining and terraforming Mars, and the Reds are in the slums. They are not exactly slaves, but pretty daggum close to it. And then you have golds, you have yellows, blues. There are a couple of different castes that all have different jobs. Darrow is betrayed and decides that he is going to get his revenge, so he basically does some significant modifications to get him in the position of where he needs to be. I don't want to say a whole lot more than that because I don't know what people would consider a spoiler in this regard, but Red Rising is fantastic. The first book is a little bit slower, more of like a slightly Hunger Games type situation and learning about these cast and Darrow and his revenge plot, whereas books 2 and 3 really amp everything up, take a little bit of a different turn into more of like a space opera type setting, and it is a fantasy science fiction hybrid. Highly, highly recommend these. It's done in 2 different trilogies, so you have the first trilogy that follows Darrow and his story, and then you have the second trilogy that is following someone else that is in close relation to Darrow, but we hadn't heard when the third and final book was going to come out. Now it has been announced that not only is there going to be a third and final book, but I think there's actually going to be 2 more, and the release date is set for later this year, so everybody that's been kind of holding their breath, waiting to read that last trilogy until the newer books are getting released can finally go ahead and finish off the series. I know that I want to do a reread of this one. It's breakneck, it's so much fun, and I think it's great for a readathon because it's so fast-paced. But it is brutal, so just kind of be aware of that. And then of course when we're talking sci-fi hybrids, we've got to talk about Blake Crouch, who wrote Dark Matter, Recursion, Upgrade, and the Wayward Pines series. Blake Crouch is kind of known for his science fiction thriller hybrids. I will say that if you're asking me to recommend, I would recommend either Dark Matter or Recursion. Those personally have been my 2 favorites of the 3 that I've read. Upgrade was not a personal favorite, but if you're into genetics, it might still be your thing. Dark Matter is one you either tend to love Dark Matter or love Recursion. I'm one of those weirdos that end up loving both of them, but Dark Matter follows Jason, who wakes up strapped to a gurney and somebody says, "Welcome back, my friend," and he realizes that he's not in a world or memories that he knows, that he is somebody completely different. It has a clone-like aspect to it that I thought was really, really cool. And then Recursion follows a memory and time travel, which is also really interesting. They are similar, but not completely the same. I think that you can still enjoy one while enjoying the other. They are very, very fast-paced. The science isn't really like dumbed down or anything like that, but at the same time, I found it to be very accessible and easy to understand. Highly recommend. Everybody loves these. I don't know why I even have to tell you about them. Same thing goes for Andy Weir. I haven't mentioned Andy Weir because I felt like that was just such a common recommendation, but Project Hail Mary, also fantastic. Then let's talk about The Girl with All the Gifts, which is an older one that I feel like is not mentioned enough anymore, and this is by M.R. Carey. M.R. Carey is also putting out a new sci-fi, I think at the end of April, that is called Infinity Gate, which I'm really, really excited to read. But Girl with All the Gifts is a zombie book. So this is kind of like a sci-fi horror as well. And the tagline says, "Melanie is our very special girl, our little genius, and she always waits to be let out of her cell in order to go to class. But when she is taken out of her cell, she is always followed by a sergeant at gunpoint. And she jokes that she's not gonna bite, but they don't laugh. And she tells her teacher of all the things that she's gonna do when she grows up and doesn't understand why that makes her teacher look sad. I'm not gonna say a whole lot about this book. It is zombies, it is science fiction, it does have elements of horror. It's a really good time, highly recommend. It's not the shortest book, but I do think that it is absolutely worth your time. Full disclosure, it is a duology, I think, but I never read The Boy from the Bridge, which I think is the second book. I feel like this one stands alone by itself quite well and doesn't necessarily need a sequel, but there is one if you're interested. And last but not least, on just the hybrid side of things, and I don't really know if I would consider this a hybrid or just straight sci-fi now that I'm looking at it, but people tend to forget that Vicious by V.E. Schwab I would consider a science fiction. And this is anti-superheroes where Victor and Eli are trying to get powers, and so they end up dying over and over and over again trying to get close enough to death that they get powers. So I feel like maybe you could consider this a little bit of a fantasy science fiction hybrid if you wanted to stretch it, but I definitely consider this science fiction. I think that it is a great anti-hero story. It's fun, it's engaging, and I really need to read Vengeful, so I wanted to put this on the list to remind myself that there's still another book in the series that I need to get to. And then let's talk about some of these shorter books that I think would be good if you are just trying to dip your toe into science fiction or science fiction horror and you're not really sure what you would like or where to start. The first recommendation is obviously Rolling in the Deep, which we have already talked about, by Mira Grant. And then the other most common recommendation is going to be All Systems Red or the Murderbot series by Martha Wells. Most of these are novellas except for the fourth or fifth book in the series, Network Effect? Yeah, Network Effect is a full-length novel, but the rest of them are novellas, and they're following a murder bot who is what they're called, a murder bot. But all they would really love to do is just be left alone so that they can watch their soap operas. I find that if you are a character-driven reader that really wants to get attached to the main character, then this is a great point for you. If you're somebody that needs a lot of world building and science, this might not be as good, but I will say that it does have a lot of action as the series goes along. Murderbot is quirky and fun and just a really cool character to follow. They're androgynous, which makes it even more interesting. In my head, I believe I had read them with either, I can't remember if I had read them with a female narration and then when I listened to the audiobook it was male or vice versa. But anyway, it threw me off because the character is so androgynous that it could go either way, which I found to be a really interesting take of things. So Murderbot's cool. Highly recommend this one if you have not read them already. And there are, like I said, 4 novellas before you even get to the full-length novel, and then a 6th novella as well. Then I want to mention Hard Reboot, which is also by Django Wexler. The tagline for this one says, features giant mech arena battles and an intergalactic diplomacy. When did academia become so complicated? This is a sapphic novella about basically Transformers that battle one another. It was entertaining, it was fun. I think I ended up giving this one a high 3-star. Again, for me personally, novellas just don't always quite hit the mark, but I definitely think that if you're looking for something short and different and you want to sample Django Wexler's writing, then this would be a great place for you to start. Then we have Elder Race by Adrian Tchaikovsky. I'm still not sure if I'm saying that right, but I'm trying. And Elder Race is another Tor novella that came out last year that is science fiction mixed with a little bit of fantasy. It's about a peoples that live on Earth, or what is now Earth, and they're always told about these elders and this elder race that lives in the spaceship on the far edges of their land. And when something starts to attack them, one of the main characters decides that she's going to go and talk to this elder and see if he will help save them. And I don't really want to say a whole lot more about the elder part of things, but I found this one to be interesting. It is a lot more about culture and a little bit more of a literary type sci-fi. If you know you like Adrian Tchaikovsky's writing, I would still definitely recommend this one, but personally it was a little bit too slow and a little bit too, it just didn't have enough world building and plot for me. But if you're more interested in culture and the writing style, then I think that would be a good place for you. And last but not least, we have one more Mira Grant, and that is Final Girls. This one is about confronting your worst fears. Dr. Webb has created these pods that will allow people to basically share dreams with one another, and the thought is that it will help heal past traumas if you can experience a trauma together and work through it. Turns out that that's a better idea in theory than it actually is. And we have a reporter who lost her dad to a similar type of therapy. So she is brought in to do an article about it, basically saying if she approves it and she hates this type of therapy, then obviously it must work. Things don't really go very well. If you have watched Cabin in the Woods and you enjoyed that, it's kind of got a similar vibe, just maybe not as much comedy. This one's pretty short. I definitely recommend it. I just wanted it to be longer. I think it would have done really well as a full-length novel instead of just being a novella, because the world and the aspects and the science of everything was really cool. Okay guys, so I think that those are all of my recommendations. I've read more sci-fi than I thought, but still not quite enough, so that's why I'm going to be reading a lot of science fiction in April. If you want to join me, links to the video and how to sign up, what the readathon's all about is all going to be down in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. If you have any science fiction recommendations for me, I would love to hear them. Please let me know down in the comments below. If you just got this far and want to let me know that you were here, leave me a spaceship emoji. As always, links to my Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads are all in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!